What happens when a late-night talk show host, known for his quick wit and charm, goes head-to-head with a royal guest who refuses to play by the rules? In just 36 seconds, one comment would turn a friendly interview into the most explosive moment in late-night television history. Stephen Colbert had seen it all. Over the years, he had sat across from presidents, celebrities, and world leaders. But nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold on this particular evening. The stage was set, the audience was buzzing with excitement, and the cameras were rolling. "Please welcome to the show, Prince Harry," Stephen announced, with his signature warm smile as the audience erupted into applause. Harry walked onto the stage with a confident stride, waving to the crowd before settling into the guest chair. The energy in the room felt electric, but there was something different about it, something unsettling. "Thanks for having me," Harry said, though his tone carried an edge that Stephen immediately picked up on. "It's great to have you here. We've been looking forward to this," Stephen replied, maintaining his professional composure. "So, let's dive right in. You've been quite vocal lately about your experiences. What made you decide to speak out now?" Harry leaned back in his chair, a slight smirk forming on his face. "Well, Stephen, when you've been silenced for as long as I have, you eventually reach a breaking point. Not that you would understand." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Stephen's smile remained, but his eyes showed a flicker of surprise. "I think a lot of people can relate to feeling unheard," Stephen responded diplomatically. "But let's talk about some of the specific claims you've made. Some people have questioned the accuracy of certain details." "Some people," Harry interrupted, his voice rising slightly, "need to mind their own business." "You included." A murmur rippled through the audience. Stephen adjusted in his seat, clearly taken aback, but trying to keep the interview on track. "I'm just asking questions, which is kind of my job," Stephen said with a light chuckle, attempting to diffuse the tension. "Our viewers are curious about your perspective." "Your viewers," Harry said, making air quotes with his fingers, "probably have no idea what it's like to live under the kind of scrutiny I've faced. They sit in their comfortable homes, judging, criticizing, without having walked a single step in my shoes." Stephen's expression grew more serious. "With all due respect, many of our viewers face their own challenges. They work hard, they struggle, they persevere. That's kind of the human experience." "Oh, please," Harry scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Don't compare their little problems to what I've been through. You have no concept of real pressure, real responsibility." The audience gasped. Stephen took a deep breath, clearly working to maintain his composure. "I think we all face pressure in different ways," Stephen said calmly. "But let's talk about your new project. You've mentioned wanting to inspire people." "I don't need to explain myself to you or anyone else," Harry shot back. "I've done more for charity and humanitarian causes than you could ever dream of accomplishing." Stephen's jaw tightened. "I wasn't suggesting otherwise. I was simply trying to give you an opportunity to share your message." "Your condescending tone says everything I need to know," Harry said, pointing a finger at Stephen. "This is exactly the problem. The media, talk show hosts like you, always twisting things, always trying to make me look bad." "I haven't twisted anything," Stephen replied, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I've asked you straightforward questions. If you're uncomfortable answering them, we can move on." "Uncomfortable?" Harry laughed bitterly. "I'm not uncomfortable. I'm tired of people like you profiting off of my story, my pain, while pretending to care." The studio fell silent. Stephen leaned forward, his demeanor shifting from friendly host to someone who had been pushed too far. "Hold on a second," Stephen said firmly. "I invited you here in good faith. We prepared thoughtful questions. If you came here with an agenda to pick a fight, that's on you. Not me." "Good faith?" Harry's voice dripped with sarcasm. "You invited me here for ratings. Let's not pretend this is about anything noble. You're no better than the rest of them." "Them?" Stephen asked. Who exactly are them? Because right now, the only person being hostile is you. Harry stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. I don't have to sit here and take this disrespect. Disrespect? Stephen remained seated, looking up at Harry with genuine confusion. What exactly have I said that's disrespectful? I've been nothing but courteous. Your whole attitude, Harry said, gesturing wildly. The way you're looking at me, the way you're questioning everything I say. You think you're so clever with your little jokes and your smug expressions. The audience was completely still now, watching the confrontation unfold like witnesses to a car crash. I think you're projecting, Stephen said evenly. I've asked you fair questions. If you're not willing to engage in a respectful conversation, then maybe we should end this interview. Oh, you'd love that, wouldn't you? Harry sneered. Then you could run to the press and tell everyone how difficult I was, how I stormed off your show. More content for you to profit from. Stephen stood up now, facing Harry directly. Actually, I'd prefer to have a meaningful conversation. That's what we do here. We talk to interesting people about important topics. But it requires mutual respect. Mutual respect? Harry's voice grew louder. You want me to respect you? You're just a comedian who reads jokes off a teleprompter. You have no idea what real leadership looks like. The audience gasped again, louder this time. Stephen's expression hardened. I may be a comedian, Stephen said, his voice steady and controlled, but I respect my guests. I respect my audience, and I respect the craft of conversation. Something you clearly don't understand. Don't you dare lecture me, Harry spat. I was born into service. I've dedicated my life to causes that matter. What have you done besides make people laugh? Making people laugh is nothing to be ashamed of, Stephen replied, especially in difficult times. And for the record, this show has raised millions for charity. We've given voice to important issues, and we've done it without belittling others. Harry's face turned red. You think you're better than me. I never said that, Stephen countered. But I do think you came here with a chip on your shoulder, looking for a fight. And honestly, I'm not interested in giving you one. That's because you know you'd lose, Harry said with a cruel smile. Stephen shook his head slowly. This isn't about winning or losing. This is about having a conversation. But clearly, you're not capable of that right now. How dare you? Harry's voice reached a crescendo. Do you know who I am? Yes, Stephen said simply. You're a guest on my show who's been incredibly rude and disrespectful, and I think it's time for you to leave. The audience collectively held their breath. Harry stared at Stephen in disbelief. You're kicking me off? Harry asked, his voice a mix of shock and outrage. I'm ending an interview that should never have deteriorated to this point, Stephen clarified. You're welcome to stay in the city. Enjoy your evening. But this conversation is over. You can't do this to me, Harry said, his voice trembling with anger. I just did, Stephen replied calmly. I have a responsibility to my audience and my team to maintain a certain standard here, and you've crossed a line. Harry looked around the studio, as if expecting someone to come to his defense. The audience remained silent, many nodding in agreement with Stephen's decision. This is outrageous, Harry said, his voice cracking. Wait until people hear about this. You'll regret this. I don't think I will, Stephen said. I've been doing this long enough to know when to walk away. I suggest you do the same. You're making a huge mistake, Harry warned, pointing his finger at Stephen again. Do you have any idea the consequences of what you're doing? The consequences of maintaining standards and respect? Stephen asked rhetorically. I can live with those. Harry's hands balled into fists at his sides. You're just like all the rest. You pretend to be different, but you're not. You're worse because you hide behind this facade of being a good guy. I don't pretend to be anything, Stephen said, his voice growing firmer. I try to do my job with integrity, and part of that job is knowing when enough is enough. Your integrity? Harry laughed mockingly. You don't know the meaning of the word. Stephen turned to face the audience, addressing them directly. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that this interview didn't go as planned. We always hope for meaningful conversations here, but sometimes things don't work out. Don't you turn away from me, Harry demanded, stepping closer to Stephen. Stephen turned back to face him, his expression serious but controlled. I'm not turning away. I'm moving forward. And you need to leave now. Or what? Harry challenged. You'll have security throw me out? That would make great television. Wouldn't it? I'd rather not, Stephen said. I'd rather you leave on your own, with whatever dignity you have left. Harry's face contorted with rage. You think you've won here? You think this makes you look good? This isn't about looking good, Stephen said tiredly. This is about doing what's right. And right now, what's right is ending this. Fine, Harry said, his voice shaking. I'll leave. But mark my words. This isn't over. Actually, it is, Stephen said with finality. I wish you well, but we're done here. Harry stared at Stephen for a long moment, clearly struggling with what to say next. When no words came, he turned sharply on his heel and began walking toward the stage exit. Wait, Harry said, stopping and turning back around. You think you can just dismiss me like this? I'm not dismissing you, Stephen said patiently. I'm ending an interview that became hostile and unproductive. There's a difference. To you, maybe, Harry said bitterly. But to me, this is just another example of how I'm treated, how I'm always the villain, no matter what I do. Stephen's expression softened slightly. If you genuinely feel that way, I'm sorry, but the way you've conducted yourself tonight hasn't helped your case. Of course you'd say that, Harry replied. Everyone always blames me. No one ever considers that maybe, just maybe, I have legitimate grievances. Having grievances doesn't give you the right to be cruel, Stephen said. We all have struggles. That's part of being human, but we don't get to take it out on others. Harry's shoulders slumped for a moment before he straightened them again, his pride clearly wounded. You have no idea what it's like. You're right, Stephen agreed. I don't know what your specific experiences are like, but I do know what respect looks like, and this wasn't it. I came here to tell my truth, Harry said, his voice quieter now, but still defiant. And you're welcome to tell your truth, Stephen responded, but not at the expense of basic decency, not by attacking me for doing my job. Harry looked at the audience, many of whom were watching him with a mixture of pity and disappointment. His expression hardened again. You've all made up your minds about me already, Harry said to the crowd. Nothing I say will change that. That's not true, Stephen interjected. People are willing to listen if you're willing to communicate respectfully. But you walked in here with your defenses up, looking for a fight. Because I'm always under attack, Harry insisted. Not here, Stephen said firmly. Not tonight. Not until you made it that way. The tension in the room was suffocating. Harry seemed to be wrestling with himself, torn between leaving and continuing the confrontation. I don't need this, Harry finally said. I don't need you. I don't need this show. I don't need any of it. Then go, Stephen said simply. No one's stopping you. Harry's eyes flashed with anger one more time. You'll regret this when the truth comes out about how I was treated here. The cameras have been rolling the whole time, Stephen reminded him. The truth is already out there for everyone to see. That seemed to strike a nerve. Harry's face paled slightly as the realization hit him that his behavior had been captured and would be seen by millions. This was a setup, Harry said, grasping at straws. You provoked me on purpose? I asked you questions, Stephen said, shaking his head. Standard interview questions. If you felt provoked by that, that says more about your state of mind than anything I did. You're twisting this around, Harry accused. I'm stating facts, Stephen corrected. And the fact is, you came here angry. You stayed angry. and now you're leaving angry. That's all on you." Harry opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. For a moment, he looked lost, like a child who had just realized he had gone too far. "I think you should go now," Stephen said, not unkindly, "before this gets any worse." Harry nodded slowly, the fight seeming to drain out of him. Without another word, he turned and walked off the stage. The audience watched in stunned silence as he disappeared behind the curtain. Stephen stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then he turned to face the audience with a weary smile. "Well," he said, his voice carrying a mix of exhaustion and relief. That was something. The audience erupted into applause, standing to show their support for their host. Stephen raised a hand in acknowledgement, but his expression remained somber. "I want to apologize again for how that went," Stephen said once the applause died down. "We always hope for better. We always try to create a space where honest, respectful dialogue can happen." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "But sometimes," he continued, "people come with their own agendas, their own pain, their own anger. And while I have empathy for that, I also have a responsibility to everyone here, to our viewers at home, to maintain certain standards." The audience nodded in agreement, many still processing what they had witnessed. "What you saw tonight was unfortunate," Stephen said, "but it was also real. And maybe that's valuable in its own way. Maybe it's a reminder that respectful communication matters, that how we treat each other matters." He looked directly into the camera. "We'll be right back after this break," he said, his professional smile returning, despite the chaos that had just unfolded. Assuming anyone still wants to come on the show after that?" The audience laughed, grateful for the moment of levity. As the show cut to commercial, Stephen remained standing on the stage, his mind clearly still processing the extraordinary confrontation that had just taken place. Backstage, members of the production team stood frozen, unsure of what to do or say. The stage manager spoke quietly into her headset, so coordinating with the control room about how to proceed with the rest of the show. Meanwhile, Harry had made his way to the exit, pushing past concerned staff members who tried to check if he was all right. His face was a mask of fury and humiliation, the reality of what had just happened finally sinking in. At the stage door, he paused for just a moment, his hand on the handle. Part of him wanted to turn back, to try to salvage something from the disaster. But pride, that same pride that had fueled his outburst, kept him moving forward. He pushed through the door and into the night, leaving behind a studio full of shocked witnesses and a host who had just done something unprecedented in late-night television. He had stood his ground, maintained his dignity, and ultimately made the difficult decision to end an interview that had spiraled completely out of control. Back in the studio, as the commercial break ended, Stephen returned to his desk. His composure was back, his professional mask firmly in place. "We're back," he said to the camera, "and I think we all need a moment to breathe after that. So let's talk about something lighter." But even as he moved on to the next segment, the weight of what had happened hung in the air. It had been a masterclass in maintaining composure under pressure, in standing up for respect and decency, and in knowing when to draw a line. The host had remained the good guy throughout, patient and professional, even in the face of increasing hostility. He had given his guest every opportunity to course correct, to engage in meaningful dialogue. But when those opportunities were rejected, when the attacks became personal and the disrespect became undeniable, he had made the call. It was a moment that would be discussed, analyzed, and debated. But in that studio, on that night, sure, there was no question about who had conducted themselves with grace and who had let their worst impulses take control. The contrast could not have been clearer. Stephen had done his job with integrity, just as he had said, and in doing so, he had reminded everyone watching that respect is not negotiable, that civility matters, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is to end a conversation that has become toxic. The interview was over, but the impact of those 36 seconds, and that one comment that had sparked everything, would resonate far beyond that night. It would become a reference point, a teaching moment, a reminder of what happens when entitlement meets accountability. And through it all, the host had remained exactly what his audience knew him to be: quick-witted, fair-minded, and unwilling to compromise on the values that made his show a place where real conversations could happen. Even when those conversations went sideways, he had shown that maintaining standards was more important than maintaining appearances. The guest had come looking for a platform, but had instead found a mirror held up to his own behavior. And in that reflection, what was revealed was not the sympathetic figure he believed himself to be, but someone whose sense of grievance had curdled into something ugly and unjustified. It was a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting victimhood become an identity, about how pain can transform into poison if left unchecked. The host had tried to offer grace, had tried to redirect, had tried to salvage something meaningful from the exchange. But you cannot have a dialogue with someone who only wants a monologue, who sees every question as an attack and every observation as an insult. In the end, the decision to ask the guest to leave was not an act of aggression, but an act of preservation. It preserved the integrity of the show, the respect owed to the audience, and the dignity of everyone involved. Even the guest, though he could not see it in the moment, was being shown a kind of mercy. Sometimes, the most compassionate thing you can do for someone spiraling is to stop enabling their spiral. The cameras had captured everything, every word, every expression, every moment of escalation. And when people watched it back, they would see clearly what had unfolded. Not a host attacking a guest, but a professional trying desperately to maintain a conversation in the face of relentless hostility. Not an interview gone wrong through any fault of the interviewer, but a guest determined to be offended no matter what was said. It had been a dramatic, uncomfortable, and ultimately necessary moment. One that proved that kindness does not mean accepting abuse, that hospitality does not mean tolerating disrespect, and that being the good guy sometimes means being the one who says, enough is enough. The talk show host had faced many challenging interviews in his career, but on this night, he had faced something different entirely. Not a difficult conversation, but an impossible one. And he had handled it exactly as he needed to, with firmness tempered by restraint, with authority balanced by compassion, and with the clear-eyed recognition that some battles are won not by fighting back, but by refusing to fight at all. As Stephen continued with the rest of the show, his mind kept returning to the confrontation. The professionalism never wavered, but anyone who knew him could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. "You know," Stephen said during a lighter segment about ridiculous news stories, "tonight reminded me why this job matters. Why creating a space for real dialogue is so important." The audience listened intently, sensing he had more to say. "We invite people from all walks of life onto this stage," he continued. "Politicians, artists, activists, everyday heroes. And the one thing we ask is that they come ready to engage honestly. Not perfectly, not without disagreement, but honestly." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "When someone comes here with so much anger that they cannot see past it, when they interpret every gesture as a slight and every question as an attack, we've lost the ability to connect. And connection is the whole point." The audience applauded, understanding the deeper message beneath his words. What had started as a routine interview had transformed into something far more significant. It had become a line in the sand, a moment where values were tested and upheld. The tragedy was that Harry likely had important things to say, experiences worth sharing, perspectives that could have enriched the conversation. But all of that was buried beneath layers of defensiveness and aggression. The guest had left the building, but the lesson remained. In the temple of late-night television, where wit and charm usually reign supreme, sometimes the greatest skill is simply knowing when to say goodnight.